moving, Mike. I think you froze.
Okay, James, I've got a message saying we're now streaming live on YouTube. Am I able to start the meeting?
Bear with me a moment, Chair.
Yes, if you follow the YouTube subscription, you get a message.
Yes, Chair.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can start.
You can.
Okay, in that case, welcome everybody to this meeting of Northamptonshire County Council Overview and Scrutiny Committee. First item, I mean, on today's agenda, are there any apologies? I've had none. Are there any from the floor?
Through you, Chair, we've had apologies for lateness from Councillor Birch.
Okay, no problem. In that case, again, I've not received any notification of requests for members of the public to address the meeting. I assume that that's still the case.
That's correct, Chair.
And the next item then, declaration of members' interests. Any members have any particular interest that they need to register? Nope. In that case, welcome again to this meeting. Obviously, this is the second time this committee has met via Zoom, so a virtual meeting. I'd appreciate members and indeed any members of the public watching on YouTube be patient whilst we get used to this new form of meeting. I think we're all getting used to it, but nonetheless, there could be some technical difficulties, and if there are, we'll try to get through them as best we can. I would like also to formally welcome Councillor Hakewell, who is joining this committee as Vice Chair for the Independent Group, replacing Councillor Julie Davenport, who left a few meetings ago.
Thank you.
Item 5 on today's agenda then is the minutes from the last meeting, which of course was the first virtual meeting we've held on the 27th of May. There have been no proposed amendments raised in advance, but does anybody have any issues with the minutes, or can I have a proposer and seconder to agree them as an accurate record of that meeting? Anybody?
I propose those, Mr. Chairman. Accept them.
Okay, thank you. I've got Michael Clark proposing.
I'll second it.
Right, thank you very much. In that case, we'll agree that those are an accurate record, which brings us on to this substantive matter for us to discuss today, which is the delivery of this financial year's Northants County Council budget. Are we on track to end up balancing the books at the end of the year? The discussion we're going to have is based around the monthly finance report that went to Cabinet a week or two ago, which you should have a copy of in today's agenda as well. I'd like to welcome Anna Earnshaw, who is the Director of Adult Social Care at the County Council, for any input that she may have. I believe, I can't see, so I'm assuming Barry Scar is here, the Section 151 officer. And do we have any members as the portfolio holder for finance? Oh, sorry, yes.
Malcolm, sir.
Okay, in that case, well, welcome everybody. I'm sure members will have some questions to the report that went to Cabinet. Before we do, though, do any of you guys want to give a quick overview or summary of what the position is? I think we've all noticed that the Cabinet report showed quite a considerable improvement on the one that went to the previous Cabinet, and I understand that that was in part at least around some of the new COVID expenditure being sort of allocated to existing budgets, whereas perhaps that wasn't fully understood. Malcolm?
Yeah.
Barry?
Yeah, shall I just give a quickie then, Barry, and then you come in and follow me in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for the code, by the way. Much appreciated. We're still fairly short into the new financial year, and bear in mind we're now at the end of July, which is the end of period 4, and I would go by what I think I said at the cabinet meeting is we're 4 periods into a 12-month year, and that's pretty good progress. And however, we all know, everybody knows that the future is still very, very uncertain, to say the least. And as a consequence, I mean, the best thing I can say is that we've got a good result so far, and so far, so good. If we carry on like that, excellent. But the future, what will it hold? Anybody like to guess here? Because we can speculate, but that's about as far as we can go. So, but it's a good set of results so far, given what we've had. Barry will give you the details of how he's done that. He's done extremely well in my view. And I think that's what I said at the last cabinet meeting. But and we're at the end of period 4, don't forget. So we've moved on as well. So I think when I look in a third of the year, look at it in those terms, in my view. Barry, do you want to sort of add anything to that?
I think I would just say that at this point in the year, we're forecasting a broadly balanced position. We're expecting that to improve as the year rolls forward. The chair's right to point out that there is a difference between the previous report, and it is down to the way that COVID-19 is being reported. I said in the previous COVID-19 report that we would have to take a medium-term view on this. And the main difference is the 18 million collection fund pressure, which will actually manifest itself next year in 21-22. Now, clearly, that is a discussion point for the budget and MTFP of the 2 new unitary authorities. And I can assure you that discussions with central government around how that will be dealt with and funded are already taking place. But as I said, that's for the 2 new unitaries to deal with, not this council in our forecasting report.
Does everybody understand the significance of that? We're sort of pretty familiar with it, so therefore say it quickly. What it is items collected, rates collected this year are accounted for next year. And you may cast your mind back to 2 or 3 years ago when we had a big debate on the opposite being done, which didn't happen. So therefore, if we have a shortage of collection this year, it will manifest itself in next year's finances. We'll do something about that, but that's how it stands at this tick of the clock.
Okay, thank you, Barry. Thank you, Malcolm. I'll throw it open to members, but before I do, on that point, yeah, I mean, there's 2 sort of issues, isn't there? There's how we will manage in this current financial year, and obviously COVID is still, very unrecognised pressure. We don't know exactly how things are going to end up. But then, of course, yes, the real impact is on next year, which won't be this council. It will be the unitary to deal with it. But clearly, we still, this committee, have a big interest in that. And it's not only how necessarily council tax collection will come in the following financial year, but it's the ongoing effects of COVID and potentially the ongoing effects, more importantly, maybe of any economic downturn that we're going to see. There is a real chance that there will be less money for the council and a greater demand for services, so a need to spend more money, which is going to be very, very worrying. Okay, can I throw it open then to any members who have questions about the current financial position?
Councillor Roy, Chair.
Thank you. And Jonah.
Thank you. Excuse me, I'm new to the committee and I haven't done one of these before, but certainly I know that we've got in-year funds from the government for COVID response. How does that actually get reported? I'm particularly thinking about the emergency active travel fund.
Well, if you read the report, you'll see that Barry summarises it extremely well. In fact, I think I explained last time it's being accounted for in 2 ways: business as usual and the impact of COVID. And if you actually look at it, and Barry will send you to the right page, but it's very clearly documented.
I'll just add to what Councillor Longley said. Each directorate has a business as usual and a COVID analysis, and the very first table 1, summarises the COVID-18 impact and the funding that's been applied to that as well.
Although there has been speculation nationally, hasn't there, that central government will be providing even more money through grants to local authorities. So I wondered whether or not perhaps there's any update on that.
Yeah, we don't report on speculation.
Well, as I say, that's why I asked if there was any update. I assume that there isn't, and that may well be the answer. But the difficulty for this council, of course, if we do have any shortfalls this year because of COVID, even if they are met by a one-off grant from the government, that isn't necessarily a sustainable position moving forward, is it? Because that one-off grant will go into the budget.
Chair, I can confirm that, bear in mind this is the period 2 report, so it deals with I think the position up to May. In July, we received an extra 4.7 million COVID funding as a one-off package as part of the government's announcement of the additional 500 million that was announced for local government. I think in terms of moving forward, and the government's view, which we're getting through our various treasurers groups, is that will be dealt with through the spending review in the autumn.
Okay, thank you. I've got Michael Clark. Michael.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Indeed, the way you read these figures, it is a considerable improvement on what we last looked at, where we were forecasting, I think, anything between an 18 and 27 million pound shortfall. I'm just curious as to how the figure of 30.6 million pounds, which we received in emergency funding, was arrived at. Conveniently, this figure, rather happily, balances all the debit items which we're confronted with. Was this a sum of money which we actually bid for, or was it a response by government to, an approaching problem which they then were proactive in pumping money into the local authorities to meet?
In answer to that, Chair, this was money given to us by government that was allocated through a formula. So each council was allocated money through the same formula. So it doesn't really recognise need. It's just a mechanism for allocating the grant. The councillor has correctly observed that the spend is entirely equal to the amount of grant, because you will see that we're setting 2.7 million aside for the recovery phase. So essentially that 2.7 million is the excess of grant over our estimated spend at the moment. There are some items that we haven't put an estimate on that we know we're going to spend more money on, but we're waiting government guidance, particularly on school transport when schools go back. But that's changed so much that we haven't really put a number on, but that could be significant. But more importantly, I think we will require funds to deal with the economic recovery from October onwards, when the furlough scheme ends and we see businesses particularly returning to normal.
Okay, if I could just follow that up, Mr. Chairman.
You also bear in mind, Mike, that you're looking at period 2 there.
Yes.
Well, the world's moved on quite a bit since then.
Yeah.
As you went back, and to look at period 1 compared to period 1, frankly, period 1 was, we were just hit by a tidal wave at that point. So that wasn't. I think I said at the time, we had the meeting then. Period 2, you begin to get a better handle. Period 3, much more settled. Period 4, beginning to see where we're going here now.
Yeah. Okay.
And I would look at as I said, the first third of the year, and I always sort of concentrate on half-year figures, but see where we're going in, because that gives you the real steer. But and the situation is that, as I said, we've got what's happening in period 3, period 4, pretty good idea on now. And as a consequence, we've got this 4.75 million for unknowns, not been accounted for in any way. So, and you were party to the presentation I made the other night, so you'll know quite a bit of what's there. And as a consequence, it's so far so good. Again, you come back to it every time, and I wouldn't take a lot of notice of period 1. It's as I say, tidal wave stuff. But I would sort of see the way it's going. It's shaping up okay, and unless we get some disaster, which of course, who knows, then we've got a little bit of leeway, not too much. And then, of course, you've got the rates issue. That's got to be dealt with as well. So that's the stories thus far.
Thank you, Malcolm. Although obviously we have to deal with what we have at the moment, and as you said earlier, it's difficult to speculate. So we do have to consider, what risks there may be. Sorry, Michael, you wanted to come back?
Yes, we're not obviously as Scrutiny very much in the forecasting business, but that is something which I feel in the present situation we can't really avoid looking ahead. Without committing yourselves, gentlemen, to any particular figures, do you feel that the 4 million extra which has been received on top of the 30 million covers the foreseeable debits which will be coming our way in the wake of what's already happened regarding COVID particularly? Is it adequate?
I would say to that, Mike, we can have absolutely no idea.
Okay.
Let's hope so.
Okay, thank you. I've got Chris, Anjona, Graham and Jim. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So start with where we are now and where we think we're going. And Malcolm has said that, pointed out rightly that we're nearly at the end of period 4, and that he's also said that the world's moved on quite a bit since the figures that we've got in front of us. And of course, some people are privy to those figures and some aren't. And most of the members of this committee are not privy to those figures. So perhaps, as Malcolm and Barry may have better knowledge than the rest of us, or some of the rest of us, given the comment about a presentation the other night that Malcolm gave to some members, maybe Malcolm and Barry would like to give us a heads up of where we were at, or are at the end of period 3. No doubt they've got a good idea. And even an early warning on period 4. That would be a good starting point. I've got some more after that. Thanks, Chair.
I can come in, Chair, and say that, as you know, we're not doing monthly cabinet meetings anymore. So there's no monthly revenue forecast. However, we're still doing monthly budget monitoring internally. And I can reveal that the period 3 figure is forecasting a £270,000 underspend.
Sorry, can you say that figure again?
£270,000 underspend. I haven't yet got a period 4 number because we're still in period 4, but that's, as soon as if that's available, I'm happy to share that. But at the moment, as I said, a small improvement on period 3 and £270,000 underspend.
So the business we have there is from a bit of a scramble in period 1, a break even in period 2. And bear in mind, we're talking 16,000 out of 600 million spend. So you don't get that close. And then we're talking 250-ish period 3. And hopefully, the way things are looking at the moment, a slight improvement in period 4. So we've got 4 periods of improvement each time. So I'd go back to my catchword phrase, for want of a better, so far so good. And I'm not going any further than that because it's just so darn unpredictable. If things carry on like they are, we'll just be fine. But there you go. Anybody like to speculate? Because we're not. We're just doing it month at a time. All you can do.
Okay, Chris, that I guess answers part of your question, but you said you had something else.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about some of the sort of nitty-gritty items, if I could. And no doubt, Chair, you'll stop me when you think I've gone on too long. So I've had some exchanges, both at Cabinet and by email, regarding how much we've got provided for in the figures for what we think the audit fee is going to be for 18-19 and maybe even 19-20. And noting that what the auditors indicated to the audit committee a little while ago, a fee in the region of £600,000 for 18-19 is quite significantly less than what we've got budgeted, which I believe to be £394,000. And I get that, if we haven't agreed that fee, we're not going to put in our accounting figures that we think we're going to have to pay that fee. That's fair enough. I was just wondering whether it's possible for either Barry or Malcolm to talk a little bit about the process by which we reach a view that we've got some extra expenditure coming at us somewhere down the line, and we feel we ought to provide for that in our reports, as opposed to things that we don't, because it's pretty clear that the auditors think that what they're going to do will cost £600,000. I'm assuming at some point they're going to ask for a fee not dissimilar to that sum. So, on that and other things, what's the process? What sort of due diligence do we go through before we say, right, we're going to put this in our reports as being something that we think is going to be a cost in this financial year?
Chair, if I may, the scale fee, which is the fee that you do through the public sector audit appointments procurement for this council and of councils of similar sizes, is around £120,000. We've got a much bigger budget in Northamptonshire County Council, in that we recognise we have a higher risk profile, and in the past we have accepted and agreed higher audit fees. So we took an estimate of around that.
You've muted yourself, Barry. Barry, have you finished? You're muted.
So we've got a budget of around about £244,000 for audit fees in this year, because we assumed that a double of the fees would be a reasonable estimate. Councillor Stamber is right in that Ernst & Young revealed at Audit Committee that they would like to charge us £600,000. I haven't agreed that figure, and I've asked for supplementary evidence to back that figure up, because I would like to understand in detail where that figure is built up. I haven't as yet received that, but undoubtedly when I do receive that, some of those things I might accept, some of the things I might still challenge and say are unreasonable. It may well be that we come to an agreement of what that increase is, or the escalation route is then to go back to public sector audit appointments and say we can't agree a fee, and public sector audit appointments would at that point mediate. I think a fee increase of that level was entirely unexpected. We never as a council expected an audit fee proposal of £600,000, and whatever we agree will have to be funded from contingencies, because that's what contingencies are for funding unforeseen items. So it's not that it's not funded in the budget, and when I do have a reasonable agreement and estimate what that figure is, I'll report it as being taken out of contingencies, which shouldn't affect the net budget position. But I can't really put a number on at the moment. It's anywhere between £250,000 and £600,000.
Okay, so once that's been
Chris alluded to Chris, you alluded to how you action this. Well, shocks like this, this is normal management, as anybody that's run anything will know. I mean, things don't go absolutely according to plan every day, and you get these sort of things come up, and you got to deal with them, and there will be many others as well, and this happens all the time throughout the year, and you manage them. And then there comes a point in time, let's say you look to when do you actually can put a provision in for it. There comes a point in time when you make a judgment of where that's going, and Barry will make that judgment. And you then at that point in time you put it in. But until you've got something a bit more substantial than we've got at the moment, you don't do it. And then when you do put it in, you take actions to counter it, and that's management.
So in a nutshell, the reason that extra figure wasn't shown in the finance report was simply because negotiations are ongoing. It's not yet finalised. I think that's the answer. Okay, Chris, I don't know if you had anything else, but I've got others waiting.
Well, I can come back later, or I've got something that I specifically wanted to ask that Anna might be able to help with, and as she's here at the moment, I was hoping maybe I can ask about that. Is that possible?
Yeah, please do. I also have a question for Anna, but yeah, Chris, if you do that, and then after that, I've got Anjona, Graham and Jim. Okay,
right. So I'm looking at paragraphs 5.37, 5.38 and 5.39 in the Cabinet report. 5.37 talks about the costs relating to clients discharged by the CCG at the beginning of the COVID-19 emergency, and mentions the NHS being provided with 1.3 billion of funding nationally. Don't know if this stacked up in this particular case, but it's normally reckoned that Northamptonshire gets about 1% of whatever national figure is bandied around. which would indicate £13 million for Northamptonshire. The current annualised cost of these placements stands at 11.9 million, we're told. So in theory, at any rate, the NHS in Northamptonshire has received more than the current annualised cost. Yet, from the 1st of August, the county council's having to bear their full share. Are we going to get money from the NHS to cover that? Or have the NHS in Northamptonshire received a lot less than I think they might have done? So that's that one. Just quickly on 38 and 39, just wondering what due diligence we do around the money that we're putting through to care homes that the government gives us, so we ensure that it's actually spent on what it's intended for. Thank you.
Anna, are you able to comment?
I am. I have to say, Chris, your voice broke up slightly, but I think I got the gist of what you said. So hopefully I can answer the questions. So yes, you're correct. The CCG received about 13 million. But the way it works is not like the way we receive our funding in local government, where we get a lump sum. So in effect, what happens is with the CCG, they're notionally allocated that money and they draw down on it month by month, depending on actual spend. So each month they submit an invoice in effect to national levels to say we've spent this much on these places. Now, it's fair to say it's a changing picture. So since they started doing this, in total, they've placed about 430 people through this process. But as you'd imagine, all of the time, we're moving some of those people on or deciding that they're long-term health people or long-term social care people. So at the moment, there's about 300 of them, of which about 240-ish are for adult social care. I think the thing to remember here, and the risk and the issue for us, is not this year, because as you rightly point out, they will have enough funding to cover the cases coming through and being discharged by them this year. The problem is it's one-off funding. So anybody who remains in a care bed as a result of those placements becomes our cost in the longer term and the council's cost in terms of its budget next year. There is national guidance expected at any time now, which will say how long they will continue to fund those places for, and at what point they expect all of them to have transferred over to us. And we understand that's likely to be a sort of tapered effect, with them gradually coming over to us as we assess them, but in effect all that funding stopping at the end of the calendar year in December. So they are getting the money, but it is a month-by-month basis on which it's released. I think your second question was in relation to the infection control grant and the controls in terms of money that goes to those care homes. So the grant split into two chunks. We got two payments, and the first one was automatically passported to care homes based on the number of beds they've got. They then retrospectively had to provide evidence that they were spending it in the way that was expected, and it was quite clear on what they could claim for that. So that happened. Some homes actually said they didn't want it, some claimed it, and we were being through that process. They also, key to this as well, have to fill in a national tracker of how they're doing so that we can spot anyone that's got issues. The second tranche, the 25%, is open to a bit more discretion. So in really simple terms, the first part you couldn't claim PPE against, the second part you can. So we're now in the process of working out the payments to go to that. And again, we'll be asking care homes to evidence that they've spent it in that way. And then we produce a national return that goes to government, evidencing what we've done, how much of it we've paid, and explaining where we haven't paid it for any reason, which is generally only be because they've said no, or because they're a home that's closed already, that just happened to be on the CQC list. But I'm happy to take any more questions if that doesn't answer the questions.
That's fine for now, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Might be something we come back to. And Jonah, you've been waiting patiently. And Jonah, you look as though you've frozen on my screen. Can you hear me? I think perhaps we'll have to try to come back to you in a little while. Next on my list, again, who's been waiting patiently, Graham Lawman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I was going to ask, as Anna Earnshaw was on the call, there's a number of items in the appendix, which are the annual savings that are quite considerable overspends or shortfalls, and I wonder if she could go through them. In particular, I noticed the rapid response force is predicting a £2 million shortfall, and I thought that was already in operation. So perhaps the big ones there she could go through for us, and if there's any subsidiaries, I'll come back.
Yes, by all means. So what you're seeing is the savings that have been impacted by this are generally the savings where it involved normal hospital flow. And obviously to make the saving, you've got to see, people going through the services. So as I think all members will know, actual attendance at hospitals is really down, as you'd expect it to be. Admissions really down, so the hospitals are actually operating, we're trying to hold them at 85% or less occupancy, and obviously over the sort of April, May, June period, it was largely COVID patients that were in there. So in essence, we're just not seeing the level of admissions into hospital to be able to do this, and we actually couldn't safely do this in the sort of COVID operating situation. So that particular one, rapid response, is suspended in its normal form, but we do have the teams in the front door of the hospital at the moment still doing the equivalent of the rapid response work in terms of trying to make sure people don't get unnecessarily admitted. The issue is, to make the saving, you've obviously got to have, just to say, a certain amount of people flowing through that you are then diverting away successfully. That said, of course, we're in a situation where our normal demand in services and our care spend has been dropping in many cases, sadly, because of the number of deaths over what we would normally see. So it's always a bit of a balancing act for us in terms of savings we can't achieve and, in fact, the offset of demand and then offset of COVID money. The other big one would be the strengths-based work in that group. And that was obviously our work on our transformation model. Now, I'm pleased to report generally it's only been the acute work stream of that that's been slightly delayed by COVID activities. And it's the same reason, as you'd expect, we can't access the hospitals, or couldn't access the hospitals. However, although we were expecting a shortfall in this year as a result of that, which is offset by COVID, we have progressed really well on some of the key areas of it, like reablement. And I can report the way we've, for example, transformed that team. We're expecting to do 600 more reablement episodes this year than we did last year with exactly the same size team. So that basically means as the hospitals ramp up in activity, we can take more people safely home. So whilst we've put these against COVID because it's fundamentally changed the way we're working and what we're doing, we are expecting to recover it in other ways. But it's sensible at this time to assume that actually we won't get the same level of activity or the savings out in the same way we would have expected before.
Okay, thank you. The other one that you might like to cover is Shaw PFI, which is a regular one for us to look at.
Yes, so the Shaw PFI, I'm pleased to say again, we have still been in active conversation with Shaw and the funders, and hopefully be able to report back very soon on the outcome of that. Simply with the Shaw beds, our challenge has been that during COVID and in a period where they've locked down, obviously their care centres in the same way other places have, our ability to place in them has become even more challenged than normal. Now, some of it completely understandable. If they've had an outbreak, for example, then they will lock down and refuse some admissions, but the centres have only been running at broadly between 45 and 50% occupancy, which is really low. So whereas we were previously achieving sort of 65, 70% regularly with good management, we are unable to enforce that at the moment because of the COVID situation. However, I am pleased to say it's been going up gradually. So this week it's been back up at sort of 55, which is in the right direction. But of course, it's not in our gift to force the issue if they're facing challenges with staff or indeed an outbreak in the home.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before I bring Jim in, if you don't mind, Anna, you mentioned briefly then the saving proposals around strength-based working and sounded reasonably confident, but obviously in the Cabinet report, there was a paragraph 5.35 where, sort of reading between the lines, it seemed that there were some significant issues there. I mean, there's talk about the validation of the data being delayed and that it will require some significant financial expertise and inputs from the service, and that there is a risk around there. I just wondered if you could maybe expand on that a little bit, for my benefit and for members of the committee, and of course for anybody the public who are watching, what is strength-based working? How does it relate to Newton Europe? And am I right in sort of reading between the lines of that particular paragraph that it is actually potentially quite an issue for you?
I'm pleased to be able to tell the committee that it's not so much of an issue for us now. At the time of writing that report, as you had expected, our financial team were largely working from home and weren't sort of working with us in terms of alongside looking at where we were at the moment, looking at things like, as we just discussed, like the baselines and what COVID had done to some of those baselines. That's all been resolved now. The finance team have been working through exactly where we are on the savings, what we're ahead of in the sense of, for example, reablement, as I just said. And remember something, like reablement, whereas a hospital bed or a care home bed will cost us, £700 a week, or probably £30,000 a week. A reablement episode only costs us between £700 and £1,500 as a one-off. So just as an example, that piece of reablement work we've been doing will significantly improve the cost of care for us. So I am confident still actually about the strengths-based working. As I said, it's only the acute stream that stopped. We've been working in terms of what it is, rolling out the community hubs that we wanted to roll out to start engaging social workers in preventative work and conversations with families, communities, all those sorts of things, and stop people needing to go into social care, long-term care as a default. And again, our pilot sites, which have continued to run during COVID, have been really successful. Just to give you an idea, on average in the past, 75% of all referrals into the service ended in some kind of assessment and some care. We're finding under the strengths-based working out in the community, only 15% of them are ending up needing some sort of long-term action. And actually we've been able to really successfully resolve things by just working with the family and community. So all the streams, so it's the acute stream, which I've mentioned, the reablement stream, which we've talked about, the community hubs, which are, say, progressing well. We're also doing some work on our brokerage work and our safeguarding. And then obviously the big one, as I said, is the acute one. So it's really a profile question of the delay in building up to full capacity, which we now have. We've had all through June too, as opposed to an issue with our objectives and the savings we're likely to achieve. So I can say with some confidence, we're in a really good place. The staff love it, residents love it. It's really making some really good progress.
Okay, so this is again an example of everything being a moving feast, and sometimes we're a bit behind the curve with the reports we read and everything. Before I bring in James, and Jonah seems to have disappeared from my screen. I don't know if she's trying to log back in. You might want to keep an eye out for her entering the waiting room or whatever. Jim, apologies, you've been waiting very patiently.
No, that's absolutely fine. A number of questions. The first one, really, if I carry on with Anna's excellent contribution, but I think the first thing to say is that we absolutely must not lose those people in the community who absolutely rallied and volunteered and kept effectively our adult social care numbers down by looking after those people in the community who couldn't get out, weren't allowed out, or were shielding. So I think there's a really big issue there of respecting, understanding, and making sure we keep in touch with some of those people in the community who helped out. Looking towards the unitary in the future and trying to understand how the conversation went with Chris, when we have a unitary and we are a north and a west, does the National Health Service get its 13 million that we talked about across the whole county through both hospitals? And if so, how will it be worked out between the different levels of population, different care homes, for example, who might want PPE in the north and the west? So I wasn't going to ask that question until the debate, interestingly, moved that way. So at the moment, countywide, what happens when we're divided? And Chairman, I would like to come back with some other questions.
So first of all, Councillor Hapewell, I can confirm we've successfully engaged most of the volunteers that helped us in the Shielding Community Resilience Programme. We did a big piece of follow-up work asking which groups which individual volunteers would be willing to become part of a permanent solution to engage in communities and making sure we help people. Because of course, even in self-isolation, for example, we've got issues where people have to do that, but they may still need help. And we've had a really, really good success in terms of people saying they are willing to continue. So at the moment, we're making it part of our business as usual in adults, that they become part of the future alongside a directory of all those services we've got, where they are, and then how we map them to people. And the rollout of our community hubs, as I said, we've got 3 that are live at the moment, and we're going to be rolling them all out this year. Will be very much about engaging again with those groups and parish councils and all those local, assets and people that can really help us and we can work closely with.
Thank you.
With regarding to the National Health funding, so the first point really is that funding is still one-off this year. So in terms of the unitary, this won't continue into the unitary. So there won't be an allocation that affects the unitaries because it is entirely in this financial year. However, in terms of their general funding and the unitaries going forward, as we do, they get a per population type spend. So in essence, they will still have a sense of the population west and north. And then in terms of allocation and their spend, they won't recognise the same boundaries we will. Obviously, we will have divided things, and they're very clear legal rules for social care about what they call ordinary residents. So the authority in which you sit and therefore is responsible for your care costs. So we'll be clear on that split. They will still work just across the county. And what we're trying to do with them strategically, as you'll know from some of the briefings we've done, is to make sure we then think about the if you like, the West Northamptonshire pound and then the North Northamptonshire pound, and then how we best spend it on our joint and residents that we both care for. But they won't recognise that same boundary. They will still be county-wide.
Thank you. Chairman, Councillor Longley, Chris Stamborough mentioned it, but when you said the briefing the other night, have I completely missed something, a briefing? Because I didn't know of any other briefing which brought us up to date.
Yes, Jim.
What was it?
It was a briefing I gave to members of the Conservative group.
So that wasn't available to us all. Okay, I think that's a bit disappointing because
no, but you've heard most of it. You've heard well, you've actually heard the overwhelming majority of it today, Jim. So, but I'm always pleased to tell you what's going on, and I'll be in contact with you.
Well, I think all 57 of us recognise the dire straits we're in, and therefore, knowing that briefings are being held without everybody having the same access.
I mean, what they do as a political group is entirely up to them. But what we need to ensure is we get the briefing and the information here in this public meeting for us all to get.
Yeah.
You've got
what you've got, Chair, today.
I'm assuming there were no officers involved in that briefing. Okay. Paragraph 7.7, Chairman. Again, this is a little bit of what Malcolm explained. Boroughs and district councils. There are 2 questions really. When you read that paragraph, we hear that the boroughs and districts will be able to pay council tax precepts at budgeted levels. So whatever the budget was for the precepts raised by the precepting authorities, as I understand the first sentence, will be coming through to the county council. We then go on, the county area is in deficit at the end of 2021 financial year. It seems to go both ways, and it may be my understanding. So perhaps that could be explained, because then we say that whilst we are getting the precepted amounts, we are going to be down 16 million for council tax. So that was my first question, to understand that. The second one is, and the effect of the local council tax support scheme, LCTS, what is the effect of that within the parameters of what we're talking about today and our budgets? I don't fully understand that. I'd just quite like that to be explained to me, if to no one else, in that way.
Barry, perhaps you'd be best to comment on that.
I certainly try, Chair. It's a complicated subject. So the collection fund works by essentially accounting for collection 1 year in arrears. So we will receive our precept as a council, regardless of what's being collected. However, when the bill does arrive, it arrives on the 1st of April next year. So we're in the very unusual position of generating that deficit this year, but asking for two different councils to pay for it next year when we're abolished, as will be the districts and the boroughs. So collectively, the estimate at the moment is that we're running up an arrears bill of around about 18 million, some of which will be collected in the medium term. But that will be have to accounted for on the 1st of April 2021 when the two new unitaries go live. The council tax support scheme, because of the economic impact of COVID, more people are applying for council tax support, which means obviously they will get discounts, which means that we will get less council tax as a result, as will the districts and boroughs. That is included in that 18 million. I can't really separate it out at this meeting, but I can give a written response on the separate elements of that, because it's made up of a number of things. There's the increase in council tax support. There's the reduction in collection rates as a result of economic circumstances. And also, if I'm honest, there's not as many houses being built as we estimated at the start of the year, because obviously that's been impacted by COVID-19 as well.
Okay, so again, if I understand that, sorry, Jim, if I understand that, even if NCC this financial year manages to scrape through, balance its budget, whatever, the real impact is potentially on the unitary the following year. And obviously that's not necessarily a discussion for us, but those shadow authority members who are working on the draft budget, for example, are going to have quite a difficult task, aren't they?
It'll be a challenging task, Chair, but yes, you're correct in that it will be dealt with by the budget and MTFP working groups for the shadow authorities.
Chairman,
Oh, Jim, did you want to come back?
Yeah, two.
I think
perhaps
Rebecca, I'd comment here. This is why I keep banging on about a difficult year next year. So you'll be allowed to be saying that many times.
I'm under no illusions, Malcolm. No illusions.
Well, we won't be privy to that in the north. Audit fees, this conversation about audit fees, in every other way, for example, if Kia WSP do work on our highways, we scrutinise that, make sure that the right amount of tar and everything else work forward. How do we, when we get these swinging big audit fees, how do we scrutinise that the people on the hourly rates spent the right amount of hours doing that job? In other words, that we are getting value for money from our auditors rather than just a very big global lump of money, which we've already debated whether is relevant or not. How do we scrutinise that?
Barry,
Their bills.
you were hinting earlier that this is one of the things you're looking at anyway, isn't it?
So in the normal scheme of events, where someone's tendered for a piece of work and they've named a price, you would expect them to stick to that price. However, we seem to have a different setup for audit fees. And I think it's right for the council to ask for the backup of the information, at least of that piece of work. And I've asked for exactly what you've mentioned, Councillor Hickwell, the staff allocations and the time allocations, which auditors would normally not release because that's seen as confidential. But I think if we're asking for a fee of that magnitude, and of course, in terms of member governance, we have the audit committee as well, who have very searching conversations with EY when they turn up at audit committee as well.
I think there, George Chairman, it was the retrospective, and I think Barry's probably answered it. But if you get a bill, of £100,000 for audit fees, that should break down into numbers of hours of different people, perhaps different people on different scales of fee. Sometimes I think you can lose the fact that it's a sort of wet finger in the air type thing, rather than this person or those people did actually spend that amount of time because the issue they found at NCC was that difficult. Very last question. We had, and I've still not bottomed this out, a 20 million additional amount of funding for adult social care. The government announced it somewhere in the middle of last year across all different councils. Now, I'm not sure whether that 20 million was into our last year's budget or whether I should be finding it in this year's budget, but it was a sort of one-off recognition that adult social care, even before COVID, was struggling. Where would I find the 20 million, if indeed it was 20 million, as I remember, last year's accounts or this year's accounts? And if it was in last year, was there a similar amount this year? Thank you.
I would have to say, Councillor, 20 million is not a figure that I'm familiar with. I know we've had previous correspondence on this. Perhaps if we take it offline and have a separate discussion about adult social care funding in the round and how that might fit in, because I'm not sure I can answer that question at the moment, because I would have to do some digging and just understand where you think that 20 million has come from, because, as I say, it's not a figure that I'm familiar with at the moment.
Okay, so Jim, perhaps you can discuss with Barry outside the meeting and try and get a bit more detail of where that figure came from and exactly what it is.
Thank you, Chairman.
I've got Cecile waiting.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. To go back to Councillor Aquel, we have audit meetings and they are roughly every 3 months. We have an independent chairman of audit who is an accountant. So I think if you come at audit meeting, you will have your question answer. And yes, I am sure that Barry will agree with me that Ernst & Young will have to justify why they want an increase of fees. So, but as I say to everybody, audit committees are open to every members to listen and to join. So instead of asking those questions at scrutiny, it might be better to ask that at audit. Thank you.
Through you, Chairman, I did exactly that. As Councillor Irving Swift knows, I did attend the audit committee. I still hold my right to ask that question here.
Okay, okay. Although, yes, I mean, I agree. I mean, it is audit's responsibility to sort of go into those details, and I'm conscious that we could perhaps get sidetracked, although, of course, the implications do have an impact on this financial year, or potentially this financial year. And that brings us to reminds us to what we're here to do today. We're looking at the current in-year position for NCC. I've got no more speakers waiting at the moment. I mean, the only thing, so, you know, we might be at a stage where we need to sort of wind up and decide any conclusions. I mean, the only thing I'm thinking at the moment is certainly taken on board entirely everything that Malcolm, as the portfolio holder, is saying. Clearly, even though things are moving in the correct direction, there is still an awful lot of uncertainty for the rest of this financial year, and I think it's going to be difficult for anybody at this stage to sort of conclude this early, you know, where we're going to end up. Chris, you want to come in? Chris Stamper.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, would like to come back with just another question if I could. Sure. Referring to paragraph 7.10 in the report, got a couple of things, one sort of quite general, one quite specific. So paragraph 7.10 talks in a number of places about funding from the government being cash flow measures, and that sort of gives rise to the question about cash flow at the county council. We've been assured previously that we don't have a cash flow issue. It would be good to hear that that's still the case. I think cash flow is something that we should at least have some regard to from time to time. It could be an issue. I'm sure it's not at the moment. And more specifically, regarding the final bullet point in paragraph 7.10, which refers to the phased proposal which will enable authorities to spread collection fund deficits over 3 years. Now, I know we've been told, and I get, that that's not an issue for us, that's an issue for the unitaries because it's next year's problem, if you like. I'm more wondering about whether the government's put any sort of meat on the bones on that and told anyone how that's likely to work yet, or is that something we can expect when the spending review comes around, please? Thank you.
In terms of cash flow, Councillor,
Barry's muted. Councillor.
Yeah, sorry about that. I do maintain a 13-week rolling cash flow forecast, and at the moment that's reporting that we will have a positive cash flow of 59.2 million. So what I've said is a warning sign. If the forecast ever says that it's going to dip below 20 million, then we need to look at it and take action in terms of either long-term or temporary borrowing. But at the moment, it's looking fairly healthy on a 13-week rolling basis at 59 million. I don't really, and probably as a rule going forward as well, I don't really want to step on 21, 22 and give any kind of opinion, because I'm very aware that there are two Section 151 officers for the two new shadow councils, and I don't want to be stepping on their toes, because obviously you know, they have a very senior role and what the budget in TFP will be for the 2 new units. So I don't really want to give you what might happen with the council tax free year option.
Yeah, Chair, may I make a suggestion? What I'd suggest, if you want to keep a good handle on what's happening as the year goes on and the year end out, which clearly you do, then I would suggest that the next time we got together was when we have the half year results, and subject to anything major happening in between now and then, of course. Then you'll have a much better handle on what the year end is likely to look like, and you'll be able to get I think, well, it'll move on from today, which you clearly understand where we are. And then at that point in time, you'll have, I would have thought, the first serious view of where the year end's likely to end up.
Okay, thank you. I mean, certainly this, we are going to be monitoring the situation throughout the year. That's the main remit of this committee. And it was interesting discussion today to look, if you like, at the overview of the whole council's position. It may be that actually Scrutiny want or feel the need to delve into some more specific service areas as we move forward and the financial implications of them. But I mean, generally, I'm not entirely sure that we can today make any new or relevant comments other than what we've already mentioned to Cabinet, and I think we all appreciate the position we are at the moment. Any other comments? Okay, nobody's waving at me. I mean, normally at this stage, what we need to do is to decide whether or not we wish to make any comments or specific suggestions or recommendations to either Malcolm or to the Cabinet in general, whether or not there's any items that we've discussed specifically today that we require further information on, and indeed, as perhaps I've just suggested, whether there are any particular small areas of the overall financial position that we will feel the need to do more scrutiny work on in the future, although that of course is something we could discuss at our next pre-meeting or ongoing meetings. As I've mentioned, I'm not entirely sure there's anything necessarily relevant that we can add to what's going on. I don't think there's any need for us to comment necessarily to Cabinet, and I see Matt Golby, the leader of the council, has just joined the meeting, so he will have heard a little bit of this, but of course Malcolm, the portfolio holder, will have heard the entire debate. Any disagreement with that? Any other comments? Anything you want to mention? Okay, in that case, I think that particular item is pretty much covered. I think we recognise... James.
Sorry to interrupt. Councillor Longley just gave a wave of his literal hand rather than his virtual one.
I was saying goodbye.
Apologies.
Okay.
So
we're pretty much at the end of that discussion, and I think we all agree that things have improved since the last but one Cabinet report. We recognise, and we've heard from Barry and from Malcolm, that things appear to be improving, ready for the next financial report whenever it does come out. But we also do still recognise there are some severe risks simply around the uncertainties, mainly around COVID, but it is hard to speculate because nobody really understands what they are necessarily at the moment. Okay, I think then, unless anybody has any last comment, that brings us to the end of item 6. James.
Yeah, sorry, I've just sent the link. Oh, apologies, Jim, not James. I've just sent the link to the announcement on the community care funding, which also incorporated the extra percentage we put on council tax. So I've sent it through the chat system for everyone who wants to see. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. James Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, there was an offer earlier in the discussion of some further information from the Chief Finance Officer. It was arising from Councillor Hakequill's comments on paragraph 7.7. I stand to be corrected, but I think the offer was for further information breaking down the 18.2 million figure mentioned in that part of the report, if that's something the committee as a whole wish to receive.
I think so. That 18.2 million figure is something that concerns me. I'd love to have a bit more information about, and I did actually ask on behalf of Scrutiny at the last cabinet how it was calculated, whether it was a sort of local calculation or whether it was influenced by some national things, Office of National Statistics, for example. The answer then was that it was very local NCC figure. So yeah, if that could be circulated, if there is anything to add, that would be useful. Okay, that brings us today then to item 7 on the agenda, which is this committee's work programme and responses to previous resolutions. James.
Thank you, Chair. So this represents the standard report presented to each of the committee's meetings to enable it to take an overview of its current work programme and also to update the committee on actions taken in response to its previous resolutions. If I could refer members to section 5 of the report, and particularly the table at paragraph 5.3, that lists some previous topic areas or more specific topics that the committee's identified it wanted to address in the year. So it's open to the committee to consider, confirm, reject, amend those topics as it sees fit, and indeed to consider any other matters that the committee wishes to include in its work programme, bearing in mind, of course, the context in which the committee is currently operating and the focus areas set for it by its remit. And then, of course, you also have at Appendix 1 to the report an update on responses to previous resolutions from the committee. There is nothing significant outstanding, and I hope that's straightforward. Happy to take any questions on the report, Chair, but otherwise it's over to the committee.
Thank you, James. I mean, certainly one of the things I do think we need to come back to is the response to our scrutiny review of highway services. But as I mentioned earlier, I think we all recognise that nationally and locally, public services are very much in a position of a moving feast at the moment. And I think it's probably important for us to remain flexible and to look at things as and when we feel the need. So I'm sort of reluctant to plan too much of a forward programme. For that reason, I wouldn't want to be tied down from reacting to something unforeseen. And I think we can, as we generally do, have a much better discussion at this in our pre-meeting, where we will be obviously deciding the topic for our next month's scrutiny meeting anyway. And any comments?
Councillor Hakewill, Chair.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, Jim.
Apologies. No, must have not raised lowered hand. Sorry,
No, you did.
pardon me, James. Yeah.
In that case, I suggest that.
Sorry, Chairman. Sorry, Chair. I was trying to get my hat.
Oh, sorry.
Couldn't get it. Now, the matter of the highways thing did come up at Cabinet just recently. Maybe the answer is just to send a polite reminder that they said they would respond in 6 months from February, and because things have been happening, and they haven't even acknowledged it. So perhaps just a polite reminder, and we could then look at it when we get the update.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. And actually, if we get a response before our pre-meeting, it might be something we could then discuss further. James.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I think there are two elements to this. The standard process when a scrutiny report is submitted to the Cabinet is for the Cabinet to give a written response as soon as possible after it has been to the Cabinet meeting. That is what hasn't been received so far on this piece of work, and what hasn't been chased as it normally would because of the context that we're operating in. There's then a second element, which is the committee requesting to receive a more substantial update as an agenda item to a formal meeting, generally 6 months after the report's presented, but that can be changed to suit. So it would be for the committee to say when it wanted to receive the update to a committee meeting, whether it does want to have that 6 months after February, which would effectively be to the September meeting, or whether it wants to vary that timing. It would also be for the committee to say whether it wanted something in writing on the response to the scrutiny review in the meantime, or whether in the circumstances it simply wanted to go ahead with a formal update to a forthcoming scrutiny committee meeting.
Well, again, I think going back to Graham's suggestion of a sort of polite reminder, it would be good to have some sort of initial response, and from there we can then decide whether we sort of take that as it is to our next public meeting, or indeed whether or not we feel the need to have a more detailed scrutiny of whatever that response is at that public meeting. But again, we could discuss this, you know,
okay. So you're asking for a written update on the response to the scrutiny review as an off-agenda piece of information in the first instance, and that could be used as a basis for deciding whether any further action by scrutiny was needed.
Graham, does that fit in with what you were asking? Seems sensible.
I think that sounds sensible to me, yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll do that then, if that's okay, James. And that then presumably brings us, it says looking through the agenda, to the end of this meeting, in which case I'd like to just thank everybody for taking part. Bye-bye, Cecile. And thank you for any members of the public who have sat through the last hour or so.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Cheers.